And welcome to the Upper Pen Podcast. My name is Dakota, and today I'm talking with Kacen Callender about their book, The Queen of the Conquered, the first book in the Island of Blood and Storm series. You can get this book from Orbit Books or through any major bookseller. There is also an audiobook available by narrator Crystal Roche. The second book in the series, The King of the Rising, will be out in December. Hello, Kacen, and thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about The Queen of the Conquered.
Sure. So Queen of the Conquered is set in a Caribbean-inspired fantasy world that is very closely inspired by the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is where I was born and raised. And it is about Sigourney Rose, who is on a quest for revenge against the colonizers called the Furn. Who have attacked her people and enslaved most of them and massacred her family. So she's on a quest for revenge against them, and she wants to find this revenge by taking basically the power of the royal island back because the king is about to end his term as leader, and he's about to choose like one other successor, and she wants it to be her. But as soon as she gets to the island, there's a mystery that starts to unfold as each of the ruling class called the Congo League start to be murdered one by one, and she needs to find out who it is before she's next.
All right. So one of my favorite aspects of the book is that you chose to go from the point of Sigourney Rose at first, this first book anyway. Did you find it difficult to write her because of the choices she has to make and the situations she's in?
That's an interesting question. I think that she was actually a very relatable character to write because the point of her character was kind of this metaphor of I think of what a lot of people feel today as people who can be oppressed but also have privilege. So I'm a Black person, so I'm oppressed in a lot of different ways. I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm oppressed in many ways, but I also still have privilege. I have a house, I have food, I have water. I have a laptop to have this conversation right now, you know. So I think that it's difficult to acknowledge privilege, but something that a lot of people in our society just has to do to be able to move forward. And Sigourney struggles with acknowledging that privilege, and she feels like she's caught between two worlds. And I think that that's something that was easy to write about from that perspective, where I felt like I often feel like I'm caught between different worlds as a person who has privilege but also power, and how do you use this power for the greater good rather than selfishly, as Sigourney often does.
That makes sense to me. And a lot of her inner dialogue seems to be about how she doesn't like herself because of the choices that she's making, and she feels like she has no other choice to make these choices, but the people around her are telling her all the time that you have other choices. Mm-hmm. So that must be a very difficult thing to think about, though, in this particular situation, just because she is murdering her own people in some of the scenes. So
yeah, from that perspective, that is well, I think that took some imagination. I personally would not do that. I hope no one would, but I do think it was easy going in knowing that she is going to be a morally ambiguous character to just kind of have her make the wrong choice again and again. And I think what was most difficult writing it was hoping that readers would understand that this was not the typical book of she's making errors and she's making mistakes and she has to learn and grow. This is a tragedy and she's not going to learn and grow. And what are the consequences of that? And that's a theme that will carry on into the next book also. So I think that that's my biggest concern, is making while I was writing, I was just mostly concerned with making sure readers understood that that was intentional.
So when I first picked up the book, I was like, oh, she's going to learn that she shouldn't do these things. And then as I got into like chapter 2, I was like, nope, she's not going to learn. This is just not something that's in her hardwired into her. She's just so bent on that revenge story.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also that she's lying to herself. Like she says that she wants revenge. And yes, that is her main goal. Even I said that that's her main goal, to get to the Royal Island. But she's kind of just using that as a lie, this constant scapegoat, because she really is just selfish and she's just greedy and she really wants that power. And she doesn't want to look at that side of herself.
Yeah. So, one of the other things that's in this book is the fact that the islands have Black slaveholders. So, I understand that not many people will know that that's happened, or they'll think like, oh, one time it happened, so it means that it happened everywhere all the time. So, what is something that you want readers to know about Black slaveholders?
It did happen. It was real. I think I mostly wanted to have readers realize, and this is a tricky thing, and I think something that a lot of people would become defensive of, but I want readers to kind of like question what we would do in those same situations. Like I want readers to mostly question, like, if you were Black and you suddenly had the power to have slaves as well, and you suddenly had the power to not be enslaved, what would you do? And I think that that's a question that relates to today's time, and that's why I wanted to ask it now. I think we're basically doing the exact same thing. We're kind of like turning our head away from so many people who are suffering, because it's easier to do so and because we have the power to do so. And we don't really want to have those conversations. And I think that that's led us to the environment of where we are today, where suddenly we're realizing that we do have to bring everyone into this fight to a place of not privilege, but just being able to survive, to be able to fight against, like, Trump and his supporters and everyone that wants to destroy us.
So I also found it really interesting that the whole time Sigourney's comparing herself to her mother, and her mother was like of the people, and that's kind of how she's written, but at the same time she's also not. She's in this position of power as well, and while she's caring and loving, she doesn't release her slaves. That's her ultimate goal before she dies, but so it feels like Sigourney might be saying, well, my mother was a better person than me because she didn't kill people, but is that actually the truth?
Yeah, I never wanted any one character to be just like purely good.
Yeah.
Like I wanted the mother to become morally ambiguous also. So for Sigourney, her mother was better than Sigourney because she figured out how to be, or seemingly be, a part of her people and her community. She started out as a slave, so she kind of automatically was a part of the islanders community in that sense. But as she was given this power, she continued to follow the line of, I'm not going to release you, I'm going to hold on to my power as well. So that was kind of like, I guess in a way they're almost opposites, where Sigourney was born with this power, and so she struggles with whether she should release it or not, and her mother was kind of given this power. And so it just kind of seems to Sigourney that her mom was better than Sigourney was, but in truth she probably wasn't, because like you said, she hadn't released her slaves either.
Yeah, so it's a really difficult story to kind of like, because in reality nobody's good or bad. We all do pretty shitty things to each other, and then we all do really nice things to one another. So it's really difficult, because it just does touch on all those themes that we see today. So it's really it's really good job.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sidetrack storytelling in the book. So you don't strictly tell the story of Sigourney going to the islands. You go back and forth between her motivation, which is her past. So how did you land on this style of storytelling?
Well, so I thought it was interesting that Sigourney has the power to basically read other people's minds, and because of that, get to know their stories. So I wanted to play around with that. And at first it was kind of like, oh, this is a fun, like, stylistic thing to do. I'm basically telling all these other stories within a first person narrative. But then it started to become more of like a symbol in itself, where it became like a question of, well, you never really get to know what a person is thinking until you have like actual proof. Like it's impossible to prove racism, for example. The racist thoughts of another person, let's say.
Right.
We can prove racist structure and system. Like, I'm not talking about that, but the racist, like if someone is like smiling in your face, it's difficult to prove that they are racist, because there's so many like microaggressions, and that's something that so many people struggle with. So I wanted to kind of like put that into a symbol of Sigourney, kind of like having all these white people smiling in her face, but then suddenly being able to hear their thoughts and actually have this proof in front of her, oh yes, they are thinking all these horrible things about me constantly. And also kind of like this idea of like who gets to have that, who gets to be, what's the word? Who gets to be the good guy? That's not really what I'm trying to say, but like, but like, you know, the white characters, the Fear and the Congo Lake, they are constantly considered like the heroes in their own minds. So for Sigourney to be able to see their stories and see that they consider themselves the heroes, and in some cases, like if this was not a subversive fantasy about racism, they would be the heroes.
Right.
But still kind of showing that they are not, because they're horrible, awful people.
Right. So I really liked how the storytelling went, especially with her craft, as what you call her magic skills. So the other thing that I really thought was quite fascinating that you did was you don't think about how the fact that not only can she just enter people's minds, but she enters people's bodies, and she doesn't know what that feels like. And then there's a character later in the book who can almost do the same thing, and so she's thinking about the consequences of your body not being your own. And that seems like a major part of the story as well, not just the fact that she can feel what other people are thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you were coming up with her craft, you said it was more like a fun tool, like a literary device, and then it became something more. What about the other characters in the book?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first person that comes to mind is Lauren, who I think is who you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lauren is basically Sigourney's bodyguard. He becomes her slave, and I'm playing with a narrative that I think a lot of people expect to this day. A lot of people kind of like walk up to me and say, "So Sigourney and Lauren are going to get together, right?" And I'm like, "Not at all. No. That is not what I'm trying to do with their relationship and their power dynamics." But so for Lauren, it was important for me to basically have him be like a symbol in the way that Sigourney is a symbol, and everything that I just described. His power is a symbol of basically he's able to kind of like stop or block a person's power, and also kind of like mimic it and take on a lot of those powers qualities, not exactly at the same kind of like threshold of power, but still kind of like an echo of it. And I get into this a lot more in the second book and how this becomes important for him and for Sigourney. But that was another symbol of craft that was that I wanted to show. And craft in general was like this symbol that, you know, basically like craft does mean power in Danish. Like it's the exact translation, and it's also kind of just like a symbol of who's allowed to have power in our real world also, like who. It basically in the story, anyone can have craft, but the colonizers have decided that they are the only ones who are allowed to have craft by divine right. And so they execute any islander who has craft. And it's basically, again, like another parallel and symbol for our world today.
I really liked the Islander myth, like the start of the Islander mythology that Sigourney doesn't know, but her servant, I can't pronounce her name.
Oh, Marika.
Yeah, thank you. So she has all of this knowledge of Islander knowledge, right? And Sigourney's not really part of that. So I really enjoyed that her friend confidant, her only one, is telling her these things about the island, and she's just getting angry. She's like, why are you doing this? You know I can't pray to the ancestors. You know that this is silly. And they the way that the colonizers ended up taking over is they convinced the people of the island that their craft was also bad, kind of. So her friend is, when she tells her about her craft, she gets very anxious.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked that dynamic of here's somebody who's actually in the know about their people, and then here's Sigourney, who's so removed that she doesn't know anything about it, and she only knows the Congolig, or the the ruling party.
Yeah. Yeah, and that in itself, I wanted to be kind of careful about what that symbol was, but that to me was also quite a lot of just like us kind of losing our culture
Mhm.
in the islands, from where I'm from, Black people in general, just like the uh, diaspora of having lost like our culture and a lot of our beliefs and our religions and systems, and them kind of being replaced by this colonizing system instead, which can for some people be Christianity, which is why I had like the gods versus the ancestors. um, yeah, that was something that I just wanted to take a look at also.
How much of your experience with growing up on the islands did you feel incorporated into this book?
Yeah, I mean, besides the setting and the imagery, the U.S. Virgin Islands felt like a really perfect place to base this on, in terms of like language and culture that came from, you know, we were once owned by the Danish, who were the Danish West Indies before we were bought by the United States. So that had a that inspired a lot of like the language, which is all very Danish based and culturally based, but also the U.S. Virgin Islands is kind of like in this in between as well. Like Sigourney's in between two worlds. The U.S. Virgin Islands were in between like the world of the Caribbean and the world of the United States. And a lot of the Caribbean doesn't often consider us to be a part of the Caribbean because we have the privilege, I guess, of being a part of the United States and being U.S. citizens. Yeah, I don't consider that to be the greatest privilege, but you know, that's but we're also not really accepted fully by the United States. We don't have the same right to vote. We're not really considered the same as other citizens. So it was just kind of like another symbol for um, the story and being caught in between two worlds.
I really like that, and especially the fact that she travels between the islands all the time. So she is physically traveling between worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Is really wonderful, and it's metaphorical sense. All right. So you talked about how not only is the Virgin Islands part of the story and the setting and the way the culture has played out throughout the centuries, but um, the mythology and the people seem to be pretty based in the Virgin Islands. Is that the case?
Yeah, it is based in the Virgin Islands. I also, you know, intentionally decided to make it very like they don't have a name, like they lost their name, they lost their language, they lost a lot of their culture. As you mentioned, like Marika, like some certain people still kind of like have memories and try to keep it going, but um, it's very lost. So I decided to have it be kind of like inspired by the Virgin Islands, but the people, the islanders, are like just the islanders. I kind of just wanted it to be kind of like this idea rather than very specifically inspired by culture from the real world.
So I didn't realize that it was a fantasy world, the first chapter, and I was like trying to look up where the islands were, and I was like, what is going on? I don't see them anymore because it felt so much like reality to
Oh,
me
wow.
that it was like a name I had never heard of an island. So very well done.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in culture. So I study anthropology as well as writing. And the Virgin Islands seem to be rich in culture. Do you feel like the people there are taking back their original roots, or do you think they're fully assimilated and there's no coming back?
We no, we definitely have some of our roots, a lot of our roots still, but a lot like I think people of many different cultures, like our specific generation. My mom was just telling me the other day of how um, there's like this specific tea that most like people my age have not learned how to make because we just weren't interested, and now it's like the recipe is starting to disappear, and it's only because it's like written down in certain cookbooks that it's even still around. You know, so I'm sure that that's like a common story for a lot of different cultures for our generation, with like the rise of social media and just being like so narcissistic and not as interested in continuing our culture's roots. um, I think we're basically going through the same thing that a lot of people are.
Yeah, so it feels like in the book that happens quite a bit too. Even the Dutch people that come, they're trying to hold on to their roots, but they actually like dislike people who are born on the islands, the white people who are born on the islands. So they feel like they're too islandy.
Mhm.
So I really liked how that kind of bled into the story itself. Is like everybody's losing parts of their culture. It's just the people in power are forcing other parts of their culture onto people, and they're actually adapting parts of culture as their own. So like cultural appropriation. So
Yeah. Yeah, and specifically with like the colonizers not really showing as much respect to the white people born on the islands. That was also just kind of like a statement of what islands can mean to a lot of people from the outside. And you know, there is like a history in the Caribbean of any like white person that's born on an island suddenly not having like the same privilege as white people from the States, for example. So that was just kind of like an element of trying to push that in there too.
so how does that work with so they're still privileged, but do they still see that privilege, or do they think because some white people from the mainland don't accept them that they are oppressed?
It's kind of like I would say it's kind of similar to what's happening in the United States with like Italians, for example. Like they're white,
Oh,
but there are still people that are like, but you're not like as white as you could be to have the full privilege of being white, you know?
okay.
You still have more privilege. They have white privilege still, but
Okay. All right. So is the idea of craft part of mythology on the Virgin Islands or part of the culture there?
no, not at all. That was
Okay.
completely made up.
Okay, good. So I was really interested in the folklore that kind of goes around with the islanders. Do you plan on writing any more of that into it?
Here and there, I think that that would be a different book if I were to focus a little bit on the different folklore of the Caribbean, and that's something that I've thought about here and there for sure. But yeah, I wanted to focus much more on just like the
Power dynamics?
mystery, yeah, power dynamics, races. Yeah, I wanted to focus on that for the two books.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I always really like stories of like folklore from areas that I don't know about. So I was
Mhm.
like, oh, now I just need another book of just that. All right. Do you feel like this book is particularly on point for this year?
A little too on point.
Yeah.
Both Queen of the Conquered and King of the Rising. Was really kind of like written for people like me who are, you know, have to kind of deal with our privilege and figure out how to basically say, okay, yes, we've been in this capitalistic system that we have been rewarded by for, you know, however many years, and we've been lied to by the system. It's time to burn that system down, and to kind of like get over that hump of fear of, but this is something that we have been um, this is like a game that we've been winning in, but not everyone has been winning that game. And it's because of the same system that we're in. So the same system needs to get burned down so that other people can start to survive. Um, and I feel like that is very on theme for this year and figuring out that, you know, when we say Black Lives Matter, it means everyone that's in poverty, everyone that's struggling right now. And um, yeah, it's also very painful to read because, like I said, these are two tragedies. And I
Yeah.
really wish that I mean, that's what the story is. Like, I don't wish that it was more hopeful. But I think it was more like kind of a message of if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. I don't want to give any spoilers, but you know,
Right. So I felt like it was very, very on point, like you said. And sometimes it was like crushing because I was like, oh, things have moved laterally, maybe, and not necessarily gotten better. So did you find that, well, you wrote this a couple of years ago, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, but everything that's happening today is just amplified from what was happening a couple of years ago. It's just got a microscope on it now.
yeah.
Um,
And I
so
think that in the next couple of years, we'll find that well, I guess everything depends on what happens in November. But even then, like, it's still a conversation of, but this is how things were for certain people before we got to this point as well. So
Yeah.
is this now going to be the turning point of, like, hopefully Biden wins, but what are we going to do from that point on? Are we still going to continue to play this game of capitalism and, like, yay, we're the ones that are succeeding and we're leaving other people behind? Or are we going to learn from our mistakes like Sigourney and Lauren were unable to and actually, like, do something to change this system that we're all trapped in?
The other thing that I really liked is the story is a secret ghost story. So
Mm.
halfway through, it becomes a ghost story, and I really loved that change of let's focus on just the morals of what Sigourney's doing and like the power dynamic to let's look at some horror and have some weird stuff happen. So I really thought that was a good way to turn what was happening on its head,
Thank you.
but it would still ended up focusing on power dynamics even in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, earlier when you asked like if any of the folklore is kind of like connected to culture, I was kind of like, I guess I could talk about spirits, but so now you brought it up again. So I do feel like spirits are not even like necessarily a part of folklore, but just like reality for
Yeah.
me anyway. And then also, especially in the Caribbean, there's just like so much pain and horror there that whenever I write about the Caribbean, spirits are just like a natural part of the story. And so that also has to do with the power dynamics because these are the spirits of people who have been, for the most part, kind of like, I guess we get into this more in the second book with Lauren and his mother, but just kind of like the anger of spirits who have been, who have gone through so many horrors, kind of like coming out in the book with the discussion of like power dynamics. Yeah.
So that's a good segue to when exactly does the second book come out?
December 1st.
December 1st? Okay. And do you have anything you're writing right now?
Yeah, I'm writing 4 books right now. But I'm not allowed to talk about them.
Okay, so there's going to be more Kacen Callender in the future, though.
Yes.
Are they young adult stories, or are they more in the vein of The Queen of the Conquered?
They are for now mostly young adults. I do have one adult book, but that is going to be more contemporary romance.
Okay.
Yeah, I do
I would
hope
love
to
to read
get
it.
there. Thank you. I do hope to get back to fantasy, but I do think my fantasy tends to be super bleak and super like this is the end of the world, and I could use a break from that right now. So
Yeah, no, I can't blame you for that. Let's have a little romance or something.
yeah.
All right. Is there anything, any social media that you want to plug, or anything that you want?
Well, my Twitter handle is my name, Kacen Callender. My Instagram is the same, but there's a period in between the two names. I'm sure I have something searchable on Facebook, but I'm not very active there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about your book.
Thanks for having me.